Now, the House of Representatives is now poised to review all treaties, agreements, and memoranda of understanding (MOUs) signed by the federal government, according to them, to protect Nigeria's interest and sovereignty. Chairman of the House Committee on Treaties, Protocols, and Agreements, Rabiu Yusuf, told journalists in Abuja that many past agreements lacked proper oversight. He warns that some deals include risky arbitration clauses, hidden obligations, sovereignty waivers, and financial burdens unknown to the public.
This review which we are about to start is not a political witch hunting. We are just trying to correct the wrongs. We are trying to see how we can protect, the best way to protect the interests of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It is a patriotic call, constitutional and essential for Nigerian sovereignty, debt sustainability, and economic security. We are facing a lot of problems in Nigeria. Nigeria has signed numerous treaties, Memoranda of Understanding, agreements, many without adequate oversight for the National Assembly, or domestications or monitoring. Some agreements we observe contain hidden obligations, sovereignty waivers, unfavorable arbitration clause, or financial risks unknown to Nigerians.
Let's now turn to legal practitioner Abdulkareem Musa to look at the implications of treaties signed without proper checks. Thank you for being with us tonight. Now, concerns over Nigeria's treaty obligations have grown in recent years amid rising public debt, disputed loan agreements, and we also know there are some controversies surrounding foreign-funded infrastructure projects. So ordinarily, this would be a good thing. But there has been quite a number of them. Before we talk logistics, where do you think they will begin with such review?
Well, good evening, Felicity. Thanks for having me on your program tonight. Well, talking about where to begin in the review of treaties that Nigeria had become parties to, there are various areas to consider, but in consideration of the areas that require review, the challenges that Nigeria is confronting as a nation must be foremost, which is the issue of security and the issue of our economy. So we must begin to examine those treaties that pertain to issues of security. Like the lawmaker said, that there are treaties where Nigeria has signed waiver of sovereignty, and that's scary because sovereignty is the inherent and absolute power of a people to govern themselves. So for a country to be identified as a country, that character of sovereignty must exist. And so if you sign a treaty where you have submitted your sovereignty, that's very risky. So we must consider the review. The review ordinarily, like you said, is a good thing, but there are several areas that we must consider, and in my opinion, the issues that pertain to security and economy are at the forefront of this review of treaties.
Okay, what are the implications we're looking at here if these documents are signed without proper oversight?
Well, it is quite ridiculous to even begin to say that documents were signed without proper oversight. First of all, it's the president who has the responsibility to sign treaties on behalf of the country. And when you talk about treaties being signed without proper oversight, what do they even mean? Is it that the persons who signed these treaties did not read the contents of the treaties before signing them? And when we talk of hidden clauses, it's also ridiculous because anytime there are international conventions, conferences, meetings that lead to the development of these treaties, you see Nigerian lawmakers traveling. So what do they travel for? The essence of those travels are to participate in the deliberations that are leading to the promulgation of these treaties. So it is quite disappointing and disgraceful that lawmakers or we as a nation will come and say treaties, there were hidden clauses They are not giving
Yeah,
clauses
I think you've emphasized that. I was looking more, we're very time constrained for this conversation. I was looking more for you being a bit more explicit with the implications we're looking at, but that would be a bit on the obvious side if you think about it critically. After I said it, I had to think about it as well. But let's look at the citation by the chairman of the committee, Yusuf. He cited their compliance to Section 12 of the 1999 Constitution that requires National Assembly's ratification for treaties to have legal force in Nigeria. Does this constitutional requirement also apply to MOUs and executive agreements, or are they exempt?
Well, the law is right that the Constitution is the ground norm of the country, and any law that is inconsistent with the Constitution shall be void. And by Section 12 of the Constitution, for any treaty to be applicable to Nigeria, it must be enacted by the National Assembly. That means it must be reduced into a Nigerian law. So when you talk about treaties, MOUs, and executive agreements, the law is clear that the express mentioning of a thing is the exclusion of others. So when Section 12 of the Constitution mentioned treaties and did not mention MOUs and executive agreements, it means that the applicable laws or instruments with regards to Section 12 is only treaties. So this discussion does not affect MOUs and executive agreements. Meanwhile, the MOUs and executive agreements do not have the force of law that treaties have. MOUs, international MOUs or executive agreements, are just an understanding and expression of intention that these two countries are agreed on doing things in a particular way or interacting with each other in either economy, in business, or other areas of human existence in certain ways. But it does not have the binding force of law, but it has the binding force to the extent that it can affect the policies and the measures that we take to address certain issues. But treaties have the binding force of law insofar as it's enacted, but not MOUs.
All right, many of these agreements, they say contain some sovereignty waivers. You've also identified some of those yourself, and then clauses favoring foreign entities. Is there any legal mechanism for reviewing or renegotiating already signed treaties or MOUs that may pose a risk to Nigeria's sovereignty or economy?
Of course, there are protocols to either, because you sign a treaty to be part of it, that is to abide by the laws, by the rules and regulations that are contained in those treaties. So you can also withdraw from a treaty and say, I'm no longer willing to be bound by this treaty. But it has their implications, because the treaty is, we join treaties by understanding and by benefits. We rely on other nations for certain resources, and other nations rely on us for certain resources. And the idea of treaties is that when you sign a treaty, nobody is forcing you to sign, but you are signing based on certain benefits and recognition that other nations are willing to accord you by reason of you being a signatory to that treaty. So the implication will simply be that certain nations may be uncomfortable by your withdrawing from those treaties if you eventually do, and then you may stand chances of losing certain benefits or certain relationship. But before we decide on withdrawing, the attempt by the legislature to review and make our case before the United Nations or the African Union, whichever treaty we are trying to address, is very important, because there's room for deliberations.
Yeah, this is a lengthy one. Time is always not a friend. Thank you very much for sparing time to talk to us.